Today's episode is brought to you with the support of the Brain Collective in Harrogate. They're a brilliant team who specialise in helping people understand how their brains are functioning and how to optimise mental well-being. They work with everything from focus and sleep to stress and resilience, using gentle, non-invasive techniques like neurofeedback and brain mapping. What I love about it is that it's not about labels or diagnosis, it's about understanding your brain and what it needs to thrive. I've had the pleasure of speaking with people who've worked with them, and the feedback is always the same. They say they're supportive, empowering and eye-opening. So a big thank you to the Brain Collective for sponsoring this episode, and you can find out more about their work at thebraincollective.co.uk. We're back for part 2 in our 3-part series with Laura Davis. Today we're diving deeper into the transformative impact of outdoor therapy, and Laura shares more about the practices she uses to help people feel grounded, empowered and connected. So let's get into it. So in the therapy room, I guess, I would call that the space in between. That it's really important to leave that space in between, that there's almost like a third entity, even in indoor therapy, if you like, where there's the client and me, and then there's this space in between where different, it's very difficult to explain. And even in my studies and research, the psychologists have struggled to explain this one, but Buber gets quite close to it. I can't remember his first name, but we did a study there. He talks about this space in between where it's important not to step into that. And I think that what you're describing there is we don't want to force anything. You've got to allow the client to step into what they need to step into as well, and gain that awareness. But what you're describing there is the nature is the third, almost like a third entity. That's bringing something to the therapy as well.
For me, I would say, outdoor therapy is quite a broad area, so other people may see it differently. So I suppose I'm being careful not to kind of concrete down some of these ideas as being, but that's my experience in the way that I work with people.
Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, that sounds great. So any other benefits then that you can think of from outdoor therapy?
I mean, there are benefits anyway from being outdoors in terms of regulating nervous system. I mean, that's a huge one. I'm trying to think of an example of that. The most obvious kind of one that I can think of is around bird sound. And the idea that generationally, so, our ancestors, we heard birds, we knew that we were safe because birds don't sting or make noise when there's predators around. And so there's something within us that when we hear bird sounds, we kind of regulate, or our nervous system kind of relaxes a bit, that we don't feel that kind of vigilance. So even kind of being outside with clients and walking, regardless of how else nature might be involved in the work, is a benefit as well. The other thing I was thinking about is, I spoke before about containment. So sometimes people can feel in a room contained, which can be great, but outside there can be a sense of freedom. So there can be something around when people talk, the words going out into the world, essentially, rather than kind of being kept in a room that they have to then come back in on. And we can find containment outside as well. So if people are feeling like I need to feel kind of enclosed in some way, we can go and sit under trees, or we can move to a space that kind of holds that way. So there's something about the physicality of it in both of those examples. There's something as well about nature being a teacher. So if I'm walking with somebody sort of throughout the year, throughout the seasons, we see transition in nature just as a natural part of the cycle. There's a reminder there that things change and shift all the time. There's also strong messages around acceptance. A tree is a tree and it does what a tree does, and it doesn't try to be a flower or try to be anything else. So a lot of these themes, although they're not necessarily the themes that we're working on specifically, are things that we can work with, are reminders of that. If clients are feeling stuck, we still see these tiny shifts. So even though it might not feel that they're making progress or anything's changing, actually, we're reminded that everything is still moving and everything is changing. There's also ideas around that's, I suppose, getting a bit more in depth, thinking about the cycles and the seasons and our kind of inner cycles and that kind of work that I might do with somebody if it's their way of working and their understanding of themselves. And again, obviously doing that work outside is perfect because we're in the seasons, we're in the shifts, and we're noticing all of that as part of it too. So again, it doesn't mean you can't talk about that in a room, but there's something quite exposing about being in the environment of which it's happening as well and being part of that too.
I love that a tree is a tree. It's not trying to be anything else. I really like that. That's calming in and of itself, really. You know, like I was touching on it earlier, we live in such a comparison culture now, really, that instantly takes pressure off. You know, if people can be more accepting of themselves, really, and not trying to be somebody else, because there's beauty in nature, in all the different elements. You know, even in the freezing cold winter in the snow, it's beautiful. It looks beautiful. Yeah, so I really liked that. You know, and how nature supports emotional healing. Really, I'm thinking of a book by Lisa Miller called The Awakened Brain. And there's actually a lot of science around what happens in the brain when we're in nature. Some people call it a spiritual experience. But like if we see a glistening in the trees or on the water, or like you say, some birds singing, where we just get a good feeling. It's like a hit of dopamine almost. We might have walked out of an interview and not got the job, but we'll see something in the clouds that just gives us that lift and helps us feel that we're going to be okay. It's okay. That job wasn't for me. And in Lisa Miller's book, she talks about depression and spirituality being two sides of the same coin. So it's the psychology of spirituality is the subtitle of the book. So the same part of the brain lights up when we have these moments in nature as the same part of the brain alters, it shrivels when we have depression.
Okay.
And so she describes it as that part of the brain being two sides of the same coin, depression versus whatever you want to call it, whether it be spirituality or just nature, the universe and what the universe gives us. So it's really interesting. That's why your work interests me so much.
Yeah, there's something in that about, I mean, I don't know, I haven't read the book, so I don't know what she says, but there's something in that for me about connection, I think, and the idea of us feeling connected to something else. You know, for me, depression can be the opposite of that in terms of isolation and internal and come into self. I appreciate it's a bit more complicated than that, but, you know, in terms of this discussion, so there's something about, opening to connection, knowing you're not alone, that feeling of community, even if the community is non-human.
Absolutely, yeah. Not alone. It's a big one, isn't it? Feeling not alone. And when we feel nature almost a part of us, I mean, this is a whole different subject, isn't it? When we start talking about spirituality and other things, but the crux of that is to not feel alone, I suppose.
Even in the basics of that, you know, a lot of the ecotherapy theory is based on the idea that we are nature. So even though we have at some point kind of separated ourselves in terms of seeing ourselves as different and maybe, obviously this isn't my opinion, but maybe better than or superior to, actually we are still a part of nature. And so when we remember that and when we reconnect with our cousins or, you know, however you imagine the family, actually we are belonging. We do belong. We aren't different.
Yeah. You know, if we go back way in time, they were, certain cultures at least, were very connected with the earth and the weather and all the rest of it. So that's a whole other interesting story, really. Can you give us an example of where outdoor therapy has been really effective with a client? Confidentiality obviously respected. Could you give us an example of that?
Yeah, I was trying to think that one of the difficulties in finding examples of these kind of things is that they're so specific, things that happen, that it's hard to kind of hold confidentiality in that sort of same way that anybody listening to this would know I was, talking about them. But so I was trying to think of a general theme, and I suppose one thing that can be worked with quite a bit, and I have worked with different people, but in a similar way, is the idea of burden and holding burden. So I've had clients, for example, will choose rocks that hold the burden that they feel that they're carrying, and we walk around with it, and what's it like to hold that burden. And then there's conversations around and sometimes actions around, if I buried this, where would I bury it? And we can do that. We can bury it at the roots of a tree, or we can not bury it. Interestingly, often people choose not to bury it. And then we start questioning, okay, what it is, why is it difficult to let go? Or what's it like to bury it here? Or why is that a hard thing to do for people? So that's not exactly maybe what you're asking as a case study, but it's something that comes up quite a bit, and something that does get worked with. And then as a result, how is it to be free of that? What's it like to leave that there, to leave that, the burden there? And do you want to pick it up again? And all those kind of things. And so there's something, I think, around when people have something quite physical that they're working with, again, it brings another dimension.
Just a quick pause in the episode to let you know about something special. If you're enjoying these conversations, you'll love what's waiting for you over on the brand new Member Vaults page. You'll find free downloads, bonus podcast episodes, and a chance to explore my VIP club. A supportive space packed with exclusive resources. We'll have monthly Zoom sessions or online video sessions, and a private podcast feed just for members. So head over to angelineht.co.uk to dive in. So that's angelineht.co.uk. Everything's in one place, and it's all made with you in mind. Okay, now back to the episode. Gaining that awareness, just different ways of gaining that awareness, really, which is so important, and finding that emotional language as well. It's often something that people struggle with, is finding emotional language to be able to express what they're experiencing or what they're feeling. They don't know themselves. They haven't got that awareness, that being attuned in that way, because people typically don't stop and ask, well, how am I feeling? What is really going on with me? People typically don't do that. They work at 100 miles an hour with our way of living now. So it's all just different ways of helping clients to gain that awareness, really. No, that's super stuff. Really, really interesting stuff. Tell us a little bit about your experiences. You're navigating perimenopause right now, and thank you for being open with us to talk about this. What's been your experience? How has this stage of your life impacted you and your work, if at all, or you in your relationships, anything really?
The main, I'm going to call it indicator rather than symptom. I'm trying to be careful with my language. This is new for me, so I might mess up a little bit. But I think menopause is often kind of seen as a medical condition, in a sense of we're kind of medicalizing it. And I think the word symptoms kind of make it seem as if it's some kind of illness or something that we've caught or something that's happening to us. But really, menopause is a natural process. That's something that's coming through us as well. So that's why I'm trying to use the word indicator rather than symptom as a way of talking about it. And I think there's two parts to that. So there's the indicators, which are things for me specifically around brain fog, around emotion, particularly anger, around tiredness. I would say those are the kind of three parts for me that I most feel I'm managing at the moment. And then there's the actual rite of passage of what it means to become a menopausal woman, what it means to move into my kind of autumn of my life. Those are kind of two different things, I think, a little bit in a way. Yeah, so brain fog is the main thing for me, and that can come into my work a bit. I find it harder to hold on to information and process things in the same way, which is why see working outside and creatively, which I do inside as well, is a different way of working with people that is helpful for me. It means things like I really struggle to hold my diary anymore. I could tell I used to be able to say, within a month exactly when I was seeing so and so, when I was working, when I was not, times I had appointments. You could show me my diary this week and I'd be surprised of what's in there and what I'm doing because I wouldn't necessarily know. So that's a big one for me because I think I always prized myself on being someone that was quite articulate. I can't find words quite a lot of the time. And somebody that was organised and knew what I was doing and quite a rational thinker. So not being able to do that anymore definitely has shaken my identity and way that I think about myself. There's a great quote by Sharon Blackie. So she wrote more recently Haggitude, but also When Women Raise Rooted, and I think it's from the Women Raise Rooted book, where she talks about how menopause shakes the foundation of who we think that we are, that we've kind of constructed ourselves and got to this point of having our identity mapped out for us, and suddenly menopause comes and shakes that foundation, and suddenly we're kind of left thinking, who am I in all of this? What am I and what's my purpose? And I used to be this and suddenly I'm not anymore. It can feel quite out of control for people. And again, that sense of it feels like it's happening to people rather than it being part of who they are, that can kind of, can knock people and have huge impacts. It can affect people's work. People can't always do the work that they have been doing the whole time. People vary in their indicators as to the level of impact. For me so far, it's not been what I would think of as too bad, but for others, I don't want to kind of invalidate other people's experiences of it because it's huge. It's huge for them as well. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're saying there is so important because it is very individual, and what we experience is normal. It's natural. It's a natural process, even though those indicators, I like the way you say that, can be really severe, for sure. But I've very much gone down the natural route, and it's a huge reason why I do this podcast, Six Pillars of Living Medicine. But I like that you say that it's very individual, and the indicators for some women can be really severe. So it's got to be an individual journey, I suppose, through that. But I also like that when our identity is questioned in any way, in any stage at life, really, it is an opportunity. And I've found that through my life, it's the most difficult thing to accept is to say, well, challenges and things that feel awful when we're in them, they have been and they continue to be in my life an opportunity. It's an opportunity to stop and ask questions. It's sometimes an indicator of something's wrong. We're working too hard, we're not sleeping enough, or whatever it may be. So sometimes when we come across any challenge in life, I think it's sometimes a signpost, and an opportunity to ask, well, what can we learn from this? What is going on?
Yeah, it's definitely a time of pause and reflection, and then to look ahead to see what's coming and to look behind about what's being lost. Because with any transition, there's loss, isn't there? And there's grief as part of that. And I think we keep on saying about it's individualized, and obviously people's indicators can be really severe, and that, that does need to be managed and looked after. But there can definitely be a sense of, I'm trying to be really careful with my language because I don't want to say avoidance in a sense of that, but almost that the focus is on the indicators rather than the focus being on the transition as well. It's like we kind of, and understandably, because we live in a society that we have to get on with our same lives regardless of what stage we're on or what's happening, so we don't have that pause to be able to come out of life and do what we need to do. And, I understand that. So there is a way of, I have to be able to still go to work. I have to be able to still manage to look after my children. I have to be able to do all of these things. That's real, definitely not saying that's not true. But the other side to it is thinking about the transition and what that means. We talk about existentialism and existential crises and the idea of us moving and having some kind of rites of passage into a new stage of life, whether that be through menopause or something else, and actually embracing or understanding that transition as its own thing, aside from the indicators that it brings along as well.
Yeah. I think we talk about this a lot in therapy, in all aspects of therapy, really, is that introspection. It's that, we look for an external fix, which is what we've been programmed to do. We go for medicine first and foremost, which we're certainly not saying that that's not the right thing to do. And medication is obviously takes its place and is hugely important. But I know from my own journey that the 6 pillars of living medicine, most people will know by now from listening to the podcast, reducing stress, exercise, nutrition, sleep, reducing addictive substances and healthy relationships. That has been a game changer for me. And we can say that the science is compelling behind the 6 pillars of living medicine. And that's not just for perimenopause and menopause, that's for all chronic illness. And there's always going to be exceptions to that, where how people react to medication, and some people really do need medication. So we're not saying that, just do the 6 pillars and you'll be fine, because obviously people have chronic illness and some of that needs to be managed. But I'm saying from my personal experience and also lots of research that I've done, there's certainly a huge number of women that can, gain back their health and their cognition and all those things through lifestyle.
And I think, like you're saying, those things can run in parallel. You can still look at the 6 pillars and think about how you can make changes and shifts that are going to benefit you regardless of taking HRT or any other kind of medication as well. It can work alongside.
Absolutely.
Too.
Yeah, 100%. It's that individualistic approach. As always, we talk about that a lot on the podcast, and you were saying that just there now. To take that individualistic approach and introspection, asking ourselves, well, what's going on? How does this affect me? How does that alcohol really affect me? Let me try and reduce the alcohol for a couple of weeks, a few weeks. Let me see what it feels like. Let me change that little small thing in my diet. Let me see. Let me find out for myself. I think that very small changes, we talk about that a lot as well. Small habits, habit stacking is a term that some people will be familiar of.
And I think what holds us in those places, I'm thinking about alcohol when you're talking about that, reducing alcohol, is again comes down to our identity.
That's the end of part 2 in our 3-part series with Laura Davis. Her insights into nature-based healing are truly inspiring. I'll see you in part 3 for the final chapter of our conversation. Can't wait to get into it next week.